Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Welcome to episode 211 of the podcast. I'm your host, Esther, and I'm here with Holly today. If you are a leader, one skill you will inevitably need at some point is how to support someone through crisis. You might need to support your teen through a friendship crisis, a friend through a marriage crisis, or a team member through a health crisis. Helping someone through a crisis is not necessarily something that comes naturally to all of us, including myself, and it's not something that we are good at teaching in our culture. So the good news is that even if it's not a natural gift that you have, it is a skill you can develop. And there's some guidelines and some principles that can help you when you encounter a situation where you need to support someone else who is facing a crisis. So recently, when I was going through my own crisis, my amazing friend and co-host Holly supported me in ways that I didn't even realize I needed. And of course, I had lots of other people supporting me too. But for the sake of this podcast, I thought, who better to talk about this topic with than Holly? She's my built-in guest. So she agreed to let me kind of interview her for this topic. And of course, it's still going to be a conversation because I also have plenty to say about this topic. But I want to ask Holly some questions and just kind of have her share some of her secrets with us about helping people through crisis. So Holly, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Do I have any secrets?
I mean,
I don't think I do.
We're just going to share them outside of our personal conversations today.
Okay. All right. Because I'm a pretty open person.
Yes, you are. But we're going to talk about this. And as we say in every episode, we don't have this all figured out. It's not something that we are saying we're experts on, but I think it's something that I know for sure you have some things that you can share because I've been on the receiving end of how you've supported me through crisis. So we'll start off with this. Why do you think it's important to show up for others and support others through a time of crisis?
Okay. So before I even talk about that, I'm going to just piggyback off of what you just said, that we're not perfect in this area. So I just feel like I need to say at the beginning of this, I have not done this perfectly for friends and family in the past. There have been times when I should have shown up for people, when I didn't, or I couldn't. There have been times when I couldn't get out of my own way, or I felt unsure or nervous about how to approach people in crisis. And I feel shame for some of that I wasn't able to step up. So I'm thankful that I was able to step up in your season of crisis and not feel that shame in this situation. Mm-hmm. So there's that. But I just really want to have people hear me say that A, we're not all going to do this perfectly. B, we have different seasons and situations in our own lives that make it so that we can or cannot show up for other people at times.
Right.
So that's really something to be aware of too. So all that being said, and having everyone hear all of the qualifiers, I guess when I think about why this is important to do, it really comes back to like two really like foundational key things. I mean, obviously we love people. Like I love Esther. We've been friends for a long time. And when she's in pain, I'm in pain. And so I want to help her. I mean, I guess the other foundational thing is I want to be treated well when I'm going through crisis. So I can imagine that other people want to be treated well when they're going through crisis. And really, no one wants to feel alone. Everyone wants to feel seen. And so I think even though those are super foundational, I think we forget them. I think we forget our society doesn't like to sit with gross, ugly feelings for too long. And especially relationally, we've been kind of taught to say the silver lining or like, well, you've got your health or like, well, you're not as bad off. There's always someone who has it worse off than you. Like, and while those things are true, they're not always helpful. And so I think that it's really important to just remember that how you would want someone else to show up for you is how you need to show up for other people when you can. And when you feel led too, like this is definitely Holy Spirit led. But I also want to say that you don't have to feel a prompting of the Holy Spirit to love, support, and connect with people. Like that's like a basic command. You don't need to wait for him to tell you to do these things. You just do them. So I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Do you think?
I think it does. And I think in the context of leadership, I believe that what you're saying is part of this is it's our responsibility to do this. If you're leading a group of people, whether it's a volunteer thing at church or whether it's a leadership role at work or whether it's your team in your business, or if it's your kids at home, like anyone who is looking to you for guidance, you're going to need to support them at some point through a time of crisis. And so it's not really something that we can just be like, oh, that's not my personality, so I'm just going to not do that, right? And like you're saying, it's actually demonstrated by Jesus in the Bible. And we're told to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so loving your neighbor means doing some things sometimes that aren't about my preferences and my feelings. It's about how can I take care of this other person? So I love what you shared.
I want to sort of say something about one thing that you mentioned, and we will, I'm sure, get into this, but one of the things you said is like, well, I'm just not like wired that way. You know, I have friends that I would never expect, or I would be shocked if they came to my house and like did my dishes. And that's not like a dig on them. I would assume that they would help me in ways that they are gifted. And that's where I would like, when I'm going through a crisis, I'm not expecting people to go outside of their gifting necessarily. If they can help me in their gifting, great. So like, I guess one of the things that I just want to say here, even though I'm sure we'll get into it, is saying that you're not gifted in this way or that you're not like, it's not something that comes natural is not really an excuse, I don't think, because we can all show up in the ways that we're gifted for people, whatever that looks like. Yeah. And it may not look like other people, how other people show up for them, but that doesn't mean that it's not done with love and that it's not important. So I'm sure we'll get into that more, but
yeah, I think that's all good. And I have one more thing I want to tack on to what you said. Okay. This first question's just taken us a few minutes. So I think you made a really good point, though, about the fact that you haven't always done this perfectly for others, but also to acknowledge that we all have limitations in ourselves and in different seasons of our lives. And so there are times where, like, if I think about when my daughter was a baby, an infant, like in her first year of life, I probably wasn't showing up for any of my friends, even if they were going through a crisis, because I was barely surviving myself, you know? And so this isn't meant to be an episode where we're shaming anyone or where we're making anyone feel like they've been messing up by not doing this. But it is something just to kind of help us. And really what prompted me was thinking about the fact that the way you supported me really inspired me to think about how can I do this better? I was like, wow, the things that Holly did for me helped me so much. And I want to take that and I want to say, how can I do this a little bit better for my friends and the people I lead in the future? So that's kind of the spirit of this episode.
Yeah.
Is just to give some practical guidance on how can we all grow a little bit in this area, and not to be like, oh, you're doing it bad or wrong if you haven't done it perfectly up to this point.
So I think in the Christian world, especially, we feel like there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things we're supposed to do. We're supposed to send meals. We're supposed to babysit. We're supposed to, whatever those things are. And so we feel a lot of shame if we don't show up in ways that people think we have to. And so I totally agree with you on this idea that our conversation today is not about shaming people. I really want to give you the permission to show up in the ways that you are gifted and the ways that you feel led to, even if it doesn't look like what is prescribed out there, what we've seen in the past, what we think we quote unquote should do. So this episode, I hope, is really more about giving you the freedom to do what you feel is necessary, correct, appropriate, spirit-led, whatever those things are, even if it doesn't look like how we've seen other people do it in the past.
Yeah. All right. So before we dive a little bit more into kind of some of the practical things, what do we mean by crisis? We always like to define what we're talking about. So let's just talk about, what do you think crisis means, and how would you consider, when do you need to support somebody who's in crisis? What would that look like?
Yeah. So, I looked this up, like a dictionary definition. I did that. So good old Webster tells us that a crisis is a turning point, an emotionally significant event or radical change of status in a person's life, or an unstable or crucial time. So you have said that you have recently gone through a crisis. Would you say that this is an adequate representation of what you've experienced?
I would say that. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I just kind of want to say about this is that a crisis sometimes is not always what we think it would look like from the outside. I mean, obviously there are crises that we are all aware of: a death in the family, an illness, a catastrophic event like natural disaster or something. Like, those are obvious things. But there are things that people go through that we would not see necessarily as a crisis. So what I really want to say is, it's not about what we think. It's about the perspective of the person that's going through it. We may not think it's a crisis. And when we have been through something like that, it may not have been a crisis for us. But for this person in their situation, and maybe the season of life that they're in, their emotional state, their mental health state, it may be a crisis. And I say this like, I hesitate to give an example, but I'm going to. Someone who loses a pet, a pet is always a big deal. Like, they are our family, right? Think about the loss of a pet who is a seeing eye dog, or a, emotional support dog, or some type of dog that helps with physical disease or something like that, like those cardiac alert dogs. That is a much bigger deal to that person because it affects them in a bigger way. And so when we say, like, a loss of a pet is a huge deal, it is, but there are seasons of life and situations of life where that is an even bigger deal. So I guess I just want to say that it's best not to judge or to say, like, well, this isn't really that big of a deal. It's best to just start off with empathy and compassion and really take cues from that person.
Yeah.
They will say things like, I don't know how to get through my day. This has taken over my life. I can't think about anything else. Like, they're going to give you those clues for you to understand just how much of a crisis this is in their life. And from there, you're just going to take their lead. I really don't think that it's our job to be telling people, well, this is not a big deal and you need to just get over it. Right. So,
yeah, I love that you brought that up, and that it's going to be different for each person. The type of crisis and what someone defines as a crisis in their own life is different than what you might define in your life. And so just to keep that in mind, and I know we're going to get into some of the do's and don'ts, so I don't want to go there, but
but I do want to give one more caveat. So there are people in our lives who have mental health issues.
Yes.
There are times when they do deem the things they are going through crisis, but there is a line when it turns into abuse of the people in their lives. And so that's not what we're talking about. We are not talking about someone who's narcissistic or codependent or like diagnosable things. So please don't hear us say that you always have to show up for someone who may be overstepping or abusing, or the only thing I can think of is love bombing, but that's not what I'm talking about. Someone kind of descends on your life with their crisis and just kind of dumps it all on you. Like that's not at all.
Yeah. And I think as we go through, it'll make more sense, but absolutely. Yes, we are not, not therapists. We're not diagnosing anyone, but we are also saying like, there are times where there have to be boundaries for everyone's safety and health and well-being and all of that.
Right. So, okay. I hope that's clear.
Awesome. Okay. So we've kind of alluded to this, but in our life, I've seen that you have a natural gifting and you're wired the way God wired you is you have this gift of mercy and you have this ability to see people and see their needs and want to respond to it. And so I think that's something that is a natural gift of yours that you operate in. So what about those people? And you've already kind of alluded to it, but let's talk a little bit more. What do you think about people who maybe aren't wired that way? Do you think this is something that anyone can do or that people can learn how to be better at supporting someone through a crisis?
Yeah. So I want to talk about this, but I want to also say that for me, and what you've alluded to this is just how my brain works. This is just, I sense people's emotions. I'm super not afraid of big feelings. And one of my spiritual gifts is mercy. So when I say this, I hope that as I'm talking about this, I'm not colored in how I think about this because there's a space for everyone. And yes, I do think that empathy, which is really the base of all of this, can be worked on and can be improved. So that does not mean that the goal is for you to be able to sense every situation like I'm able to do or put yourself in people. Like that's not what we're talking about. There's not some ultimate goal that I or anyone is expecting you to get to. It's just how can you take where you're at, assess where your giftings are, and improve on it. That's really all it comes down to. So I think this is a lot more simple than what we make it. Really, empathy just comes with putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So you sort of hear about a situation and you just kind of process, like, if I was going through that, how would I be feeling? What would I be thinking? What would I need around me to be able to function during a time like that? I mean, it really just comes from putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And then from there, it really is just start with what comes to mind. If you hear about a person that has lost a loved one, and the first thing that comes to your mind is, I should bring them a meal, then bring them a meal, or send them a gift card for a meal, or, we make it way more complicated than we need to. And I think part of that is that we're really wired to kind of have a reward for something good that we do. And that is not always going to be the case. There are times when we need to just send a meal, drop it off, and then walk away and let it be what it is. If it's helpful, great. If we have to let go of the reward or the outcome from that. So I think that when we tie rewards to it, for a lot of people, they feel like, well, I did something. Now I expect them to say thank you, or I expect them to, do something back or write me a thank you card, and we automatically get offended because it wasn't reciprocated in some way, or they didn't even acknowledge it. And I want you to know that that's not the point of empathy. The point of empathy and compassion is placing ourselves in someone else's shoes, seeing their need and fulfilling it, full stop, period, end of sentence. There's nothing after that.
Yeah.
And so if you've been caught in that trap before of, oh, well, I sent this and they never sent me a thank you card, so I'm never going to do that again. I want to try to help you like let go of that and release that, because we have to be showing up for people. Empathy is about showing up for people without any demands on them, especially when someone's in crisis. They are not going to respond in a way that they normally would. They oftentimes can't even put words to it. They don't oftentimes even know what they need. So when you give them a meal, sometimes they can't even process whether they needed that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Or whether we have to really come out of the thinking that this is a normal, rational person who's thinking on all, like firing on all cylinders. They're not.
Right.
So I want to release that from you, that, you know, you need to get something in return. I do think it can be worked on, but I think that a lot of it comes with just being sensitive to the situation, figuring out kind of where someone's at and just going that next step with them. I mean, I know that as you and I talked through all of this, literally, like I didn't have a plan at the beginning that I said, I'm going to do X, Y, Z for the next however many months. You know, we just talked. And as you had things that you needed that I could do, I just did them. And then we kept talking and, you know, there were things you needed at different times. And it was really just about engaging with you where you were at. That's really what it comes down to, engaging with someone with where they're at and trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that's really what it is. And I do think that I think it can be worked on. So if you felt in the past that, oh, that's just not me, I would challenge you to kind of take a step back and think about what preconceived notions you are assuming about yourself. What things are you assuming either you're not good at, or in places where you've been offended by someone who hasn't accepted your help or didn't respond in the way that you wanted? Like, go backwards and just kind of figure out where that comes from and try to work on it, because that's really probably your first or biggest barrier to kind of looking at someone else's life and figuring out sort of what they need or where they're at through a crisis. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I want to call out, you know, one example is, like you said, the way you're wired is a certain way. And I have two people that I can think of in my life that I don't even know super, super well, but they were supports to me in the past several months as well. And they are definitely people that don't show emotion. They have they're pretty tight-lipped about their own struggles, their own challenges. But when I had talked with them and, you know, they had supported me, they each did things to support me. And I guess my point is, it's not just about your personality. It really is something that you can choose to do. And I honestly think there's two things. One is learning to be okay with being uncomfortable. And that is, like you said, our culture is not really comfortable with difficult things and painful situations. We want to fix things. We want to move forward. We want to just get over it and move on. So you need to personally learn to become uncomfortable with uncomfortable situations, or learn to be comfortable with uncomfortable situations. And then the second thing is that it takes time. Like, you have to actually take a minute to stop and think before you say something to someone in crisis, or stop and think, okay, how is this potentially affecting this person right now? And what could I do to help? And it just takes time. And some of us just are so busy and consumed with our own lives that we forget to take that time. And I'm saying that because that's how I operate. I am much more like task oriented. I just want to move to the next task, and I forget to stop and think about the person sometimes. And so this is a reminder that it takes time, and it takes that intentional thinking. Like you said, if Holly is going through this right now, what might she be feeling? What might be something that I could do to help her? So
I think I want to say this before we kind of go into the do's and don'ts. I do think that your level of sort of intervention, support, whatever, does kind of depend on how close you are to the person. I think that, there's nothing wrong with loving people you don't know. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but what I'm saying is I'm going to come through and support Esther in a very different way than someone I've just met. But that doesn't mean that I can't say, hey, can I send you a card, or can I write you a text, or like, hey, I just thought of you. Like literally sometimes just getting a text where someone says like, I see your pain and I'm thinking of you. I just got chills like that.
Yeah.
Like that literally makes me feel like, oh my gosh, someone is seeing me in my pain. It does not have to be the meal or the work project or the money or whatever. It can literally be, I'm thinking of you and I just prayed for you. Like that's literally all it has to be.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that's actually some of the things that I received. Like the minute I would get that, I would tear up because it just was that moment that I was feeling something and God was just like, boop. And that person responded to that prompting and sent that. So you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be something big. Yeah. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts. We have some do's and don'ts because there is for you sometimes, like you said, intuitive things that you do. And then there's also not like a necessarily a 100% always do this kind of thing. But there also are some general guidelines that we're going to give you here, and some things that ever since I was a teenager who went through losing my dad in a tragic accident, immediately I had things that were like, don't ever do that to someone who is grieving. Like it's not helpful. So let's talk about do's and don'ts of supporting someone in crisis.
Yeah. So before we get into any of these practical things, I need to say that this is all based on a foundation of trust. What you are doing, how you're interacting with the person is all about building trust and giving them a safe place. So like everything you do, and I hate to like put such like weight on this, but it's really true. Everything you do either conveys trust or conveys uncertainty. And so either that person is hearing from you, hey, I'm a safe place, I can be trusted, you can rely on me at this point, or they're saying, I don't really know if I can support you. I don't really see your pain. I don't really, you know what I mean? Like the things that you say either work that person towards more trust in you or in more uncertainty and mistrust, distrust, untrust, whatever the word is.
Yes. Yeah.
So all of this really is, and I hate to use the word proving, but the reason I use that word, so you need to be proving that you're trustworthy. The reason I use that word is because oftentimes in crisis, especially relational or emotional crisis, people start questioning everything. Who can I trust? Who is here for me? Who is the person that's going to stand up for me or be in my corner? Because when you're in a relational or an emotional crisis, oftentimes that trust has been betrayed. And so you then start to question everything else. I can't necessarily say that for like physical crisis or something like that, but still it is an unsteady place to be. And so really you are just proving to that person that you can be trustworthy and that you can maintain it throughout. So that like, before we even get into any of this, if someone tells you something, it's confidence. Just, they don't even have to say that to you. Like, just keep it to yourself. And if you then realize later on that, oh, you could probably talk about it, great. But at least you didn't betray their trust. Just assume it from the beginning. It's confidential.
That's a really good point. Confidential. Yes, so, that's something that someone in crisis doesn't want to have to say to you.
Nope. And they may not even think about it.
No.
So just assume it.
I love it. All right. So, well, and maybe that's our first do is keep anything that they share with you in confidence.
Yeah. You know, I think too, like you have so many raw emotions when you're going through crisis that sometimes you say things that you don't really mean or you're processing. So it's a little bit more, what's the word? Like stark unedited, or like more extreme than what you would actually want to really say in the end. And so you can't just take what they're saying and be like, oh, well, this person believes this or what. Like, no, like they are. Yeah. Anyway, they're not in a place where they are in their normal frame of mind. So, all right. So let's look at our do's. So number one, just listen. Don't speak. Just let them say whatever they need to say. And I think another thing that kind of goes along with listening is not being shocked. Like, I don't want anyone who's coming to me who has something that they feel is a huge deal. And this may be something that they are like going through that they've thought about. And then I have this crazy reaction to it. Even if I'm listening, I have this crazy reaction. And then I go, oh, that's something I should have never told them because they can't handle it. So like, not only do you need to listen well, but you need to gauge your reactions. And when I say that, I mean, it's okay to be like, oh, wow, that's huge, or like, validate feelings, but it's not about like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would ever say that. Or, like we are here we're not judging, we're accepting, even if it's something we don't agree with, like just let the person vent, let them get it out because they need to be able to process all of those raw emotions, even if it's not necessarily what their actual feeling is in the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So acknowledge their pain. And it really goes along with listening. But, if you are going to say something when you're listening, just simply saying, wow, that sounds so difficult to be going through, or I can see how much pain you're in right now. It sounds like you are really struggling. And that's just a basic communication principle of communicating with empathy instead of saying, well, God must have a plan for this, or, that goes in the don't category. The don't category is trying to fix it. So that would be, and again, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but
that's okay.
When you're acknowledging their pain, that's all you're doing is you're just being okay with what you just heard, like you said, without being shocked, and recognizing and validating that they are in pain, saying, okay, Holly, this is so hard. Like, I can't imagine what it's like to be in your shoes, to be walking through this. Some version of that, right? Instead of coming up with some sort of way to fix it or change it or make it better. And it's like, I'm pretty sure there's like research about this, that just someone being able to process verbally and share where they're at and have that validated or listened to or acknowledged is healing for them. That in and of itself is a healing thing. And so it's better for the person in crisis to be able to do that and for you to acknowledge their pain than for you to try to come up with a way to fix it, at least at first. So acknowledging their pain and we'll get into the don'ts later. Sorry. I keep jumping ahead.
Okay. So I think the next one is be okay with not knowing all the details. They may not be ready to tell you, or they can't tell you everything. So it's okay to not know all the nitty gritty details. And it's okay to not know, like, it's okay for someone to say, look, this person, I'm not even going to tell you who it is, said something really hurtful to me. You don't have to go, well, who was it? And what did they say?
Right.
Please don't do that. If the person feels comfortable to share with you those details, that's okay. Again, we're going to keep it in confidence, but it's okay to be able to, and you can support a person without all the details. You don't have to know everything. And frankly, sometimes it's not their information to share, number one. Sometimes it can make a situation worse. Sometimes they want to be able to get support from you without coloring your relationship with that other person. Like sometimes it's to protect you. So let's just remember that it's okay to not know all the details, and let's not be a gossipy pants. Like let's just support with whatever detail you're given. And it's okay to say like, look, I don't know what they said to you, but obviously it was really hurtful. Like, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Why was it so hurtful? Like, let's process this together. Like, I'm really sorry, whatever they did or said to you.
Yep.
So release the need to know.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do the next one. So ask whether they want to be listened to or whether they are looking for some kind of advice or insight or wisdom. Like, don't assume you know the answer to that question. A lot of times it is just going to be that they want to be listened to, but there may be a point, there may be a time in this crisis where they may be like, yeah, I would value your insight on maybe how I can respond to this or how I can deal with this or what have you done? And that's the opportunity when you can step in and say, well, when I went through something XYZ, this is how I handled it. And this is what helped me in that time or whatever. But asking that question before you jump into advice giving is really, really helpful.
And I think oftentimes they will kind of give you clues. I mean, if they're just sort of spewing feelings and sort of getting it all out to begin with, that's really the time to listen. But if they're like, I don't know what to do, I need help, what would you do? How do I even approach this? I mean, there's different questions and different clues that people will give you as to what they want. And I really think that, especially if you're hearing it for the first time, please don't give that advice or wisdom right away. Like, just let them process. Oftentimes we jump to fix it mode when really we just need to kind of let things settle in our mind and in our hearts. Because oftentimes we don't even know how we feel about things. So, and then the sort of last one on our do's list is just look for practical ways to support. And when I say practical, I just mean sort of actions. I mean, what things can you say? What words of support can you offer that are not judgmental, that are not advicey, like, hey, I'm thinking of you today, or hey, how can I pray for you today? Or is there anything that's really bothering you today that we can talk about? Like, it doesn't have to be about the crisis. Like, I put on my pants and they don't fit today. Like, or like, you know what I mean? Or like, my laundry is just out of control. Like, sometimes they just need to talk about those things. But then at the same time, like, if you hear your friend saying my laundry is out of control and you have the time and the ability to go do it for them, go do it. Right. So there are practical things that you can do. Definitely, sometimes we can support monetarily. Sometimes that is anonymous. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we have a skill that we can give to them. Like, if something happened in my house and heaven forbid I had to like nail a nail into a piece of wood, I would be totally totally beside myself. But there are people that know how to do that, and it's second nature to them. So like, think about those things and offer those supports to the best of your ability. I think the caveat, again, there's a couple caveats there. Let go of the results. Don't expect a thank you. Don't expect a whatever. Sometimes people are just surviving. But then also, don't be hurt if they say no. Most of the time, it's not about you. It's either them not knowing what they need. They either need some space or some quiet, and you coming to do that is intrusive, or, there's lots of reasons why someone might say no. That doesn't mean that they won't need it again in the future, but it's not about you. Generally, they're not rejecting you. They just don't know how to process what they need. And saying no or declining is just their way of maybe securing their safety or helping them survive in what they need to survive through today.
Yeah.
So just give up on the result, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I want to just piggyback on that as far as looking for practical ways to support. I think one of the things that I've heard from other people maybe going through cancer or things like that, is don't ask the person, what can I do to help you? Instead, come up with an idea and offer it. And I think even coming up with two options, like, hey, I could either come do your laundry for you, or I could drop off a meal. Which would be most helpful to you right now? because they might be like, no, I don't want somebody in my house right now. I can't handle it, but I could handle somebody dropping off a meal. And so again, I think, sometimes we don't know what to do, right? We don't know what to do to help someone. And so we might need to get creative. And I'm going to link up an episode we did with Carrie Bartkiss. It was quite a long time ago, but I know she has some resources in her podcast and probably in that episode where she talks about various ways to help support another person going through grief or crisis. So we'll link that up in the show notes because again, we sometimes get boxed into this, like, there's only like 3 things you can do when someone is in crisis. And there's really a lot more. And like you said, they can line up with your gifts and talents. So you can get creative.
And sometimes it's not even about meeting a need. Sometimes it's like send them flowers or send them a little gift that, shows that you are acknowledging the pain. I have sent in the past for people who've gone through pregnancy loss or miscarriage, just something in honor of that baby, which basically just shows like that you understand that their grief is real and it is not getting their laundry done and it's not any of those things, but it's just a reminder that hopefully that they can look at in the future that says, I remember when this person was thinking of me. And so it's just a small reminder of the fact that you're supportive and you see them in their pain. So it doesn't even have to, even though we're talking about practical, like it can literally be some sort of little luxury as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get into the don'ts. What should you not do?
Yeah. Okay. So don't minimize their pain. Don't be like, well, what they said wasn't really that hurtful. Like, what's your problem? That's probably not something you should do.
Don't say that.
And even if in your case, you wouldn't be hurt by that.
Right.
That's not the point. It's about them. So don't minimize their pain. Don't make it not important. Even if in your mind, it feels small and insignificant. It's obviously a big deal to them. And if they are your friend and you love them, you need to be able to try to empathize with what they're going through, even if it doesn't make any sense to you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Don't give them pat answers or even necessarily quote scripture. Now, I'm going to say this with a caveat because, again, I think part of this is based on the level of relationship you have with the person and the situation, the conversation. There may be times when God prompts you, the Holy Spirit prompts you to share from scripture, and yes, do that. But I think the majority of the time when we pull out these answers that even are truthful, like you said earlier, that come from scripture, that God does work everything for good according to, those who love him. But that kind of answer when someone is in pain is not helpful. It's more helpful for you to acknowledge their pain, to be with them. So I guess I'm saying this with the caveat that there's a time and a place. But a lot of times these answers that are like, oh, well, God must have something better for you on the other side of this. Or, oh, now they're in a better place because now they're in heaven. When someone has just lost a loved one, that doesn't feel super comforting to them. Again, it feels like you're kind of just jumping over the pain and trying to get to the good part. Right. And I think that's part of the thing of being okay with being uncomfortable is we've got to be willing to sit in the dust, in the dirt with someone, in the tears, in the mud. And then together you're going to walk with them out into the healing. So it's a big one for me. That was one of the things that
you wouldn't slap a Band-Aid on a stab wound, right? Like, I mean, doing that to someone, they would just be like, why are you even here? Like, that's not helpful. Like, go get me a huge towel and put some pressure on this stab wound, please.
Yeah. Right.
So just remember that the things that we say are tools to either help or hurt. And when you just slap a pat answer on it, it's like a Band-Aid on a stab wound. It's not really helping. And you're really just kind of in the way.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's really blunt. I think I have a hard time with that one. But anyway, okay.
Can I say one more thing about that? It's 95% of the time, I think people are doing this with the best of intentions and they are trying to be helpful, right?
Yes.
But this is the point of this episode is that when you are actually in a crisis, you recognize how often this type of thing happens and how unhelpful it is for the majority of people. Now, sometimes there may be a time, and I'm sure even in some of my conversation with some of my friends, we have brought up scripture and there has been references to God's truth, but it's been in the context of that trusting, deep relationship, not just something that someone is saying. So if you're looking for something to say in a quick answer, you can say, I'm so sorry for what you're going through right now.
Well, and two, like, I remember when Zach's dad died, we told someone out in public, she was like, hey, how are you doing? Or like something along those lines. And he's like, well, my dad passed away. And her answer was literally, that sucks. And I'm telling you, like, oh my gosh, still years later, that's the response I remember rather than, oh, he's in a better place or whatever. Like, I remember the person who was like, oh, that's awful. Like, wow, that's terrible. You know what I mean? Like, I would rather someone say to me, look, I don't know what to say to you, but what you're going through is terrible.
Yeah.
Wow.
100%.
That is so genuine and so heartfelt and like just cuts right to the core of the issue. What you're going through is terrible.
Well, and it acknowledges your pain again. Like saying that sucks acknowledges your pain instead of trying to just make it go away. So, okay. Let's go to the next one.
Okay. So the next one is don't assume how someone is feeling at any given time. And part of the reason that I think this is really important is when someone goes through a crisis, they are in grief. They've lost something. They've been betrayed or they've been hurt. They've lost something physical, whatever it is. And for anyone that's gone through grief, you know that there are days when you're angry. There's days when you're shocked. There's days when you're sad. There's days when you're despondent and apathetic. Like, you have no idea from day to day what you're going to wake up or from minute to minute how you're going to feel. So don't assume. Don't assume. And if they're having a good day, help them be okay with that. Because a lot of times, especially in like loss of a loved one or in disease or something, we feel guilty about having good days. And so just remember that if they are having a good day, let's just celebrate the happy 5 minutes. We might need some comic relief. We might need a laugh a little bit. That might be the healing moment that they need. It's not like, oh, don't forget that this terrible thing happened to you. Let's just try to step into every conversation and gauge within the first few minutes where that person is at and sort of gauge our response to them. Sometimes I know that when I'm going through it, I know there was like, so you sort of had something that you went through, and then shortly thereafter, I had something I went through. And there was a time when I just called Esther and I was like, I didn't say this, but it was just like, I just need to laugh about this. Is this really happening? Like, is this the real life that we are living right now? And we just laughed about it. Like, I laughed hysterically like a crazy person. And I just needed that, like, hey, is this really happening to me?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So, yeah.
And sometimes the person in crisis can feel guilty about that. They can feel like, especially like you said, if it's a death situation, like I know even after my dad died, like there's times where you feel guilty for being happy in the moment of life. And it's kind of like this maddening thing. And like you said, just the amount of emotions and the roller coaster of emotions you can feel in crisis are really intense. And so again, when you're the person on the other side of that, trying to support your friend or your team member, or your child or whatever it is, like just kind of being more of the stable person who can kind of stay grounded and allow that person to be on the roller coaster is really helpful. Sometimes you're on the roller coaster together. I mean, and that can be fun too, because you're just hands in the air. You just don't know what's going to happen. But there's times where you need to be the grounded person saying, yes, it's okay if you're angry. It's okay if you're sad. It's okay if you're laughing hysterically, because this is insane. Like, it's okay. So, yeah.
What life are we living?
Oh, man. Okay. I want to say the next one. So don't one up them with your own story of what happened to you. And often your one up story is also you're saying it's just as bad or maybe even worse than what they're going through.
Oh, yeah.
And again, you're often telling a story that you feel will be helpful because you think, oh, well, I got through my thing. And so they're going to get through their thing. But a lot of times you telling your story, first of all, it's shifting the focus to you. It's taking the focus off their pain and saying, well, look at what happened to me. And I was okay. And again, context, time and place. There are times when I share my story of loss and grief with somebody because in the context of the conversation, it may be helpful. But a lot of times it's not helpful. And a lot of times you don't have enough information. This is, again, I would say probably more so the case with somebody if you don't know them very well and you find out a little bit about what has happened in their life and you share your story and it's not even comparable. It's like sometimes it's not comparable and it's not helpful to share your story. So just generally, I think staying away from sharing much about your own story unless you're asked or unless the relationship is close enough that you think it would make sense in that moment.
Yeah. And I think too, one way that sharing your own story can be helpful is if the person is like feeling guilty for how they feel. So oftentimes, like if I were to say, well, when I went through the death of my dad, there were days that it was hard and it felt like this or it felt like that. So it's very normal for you to feel this way. That's different than, well, this happened to me and it was way worse than what you're going through. And it's more about validating and saying, I've been there. I understand that you don't feel right or that, you know what I mean? This feels wrong to you or whatever. But I can tell you that when I went through this, I experienced the same thing or something similar.
Exactly.
I think it's oftentimes the heart behind what you're saying and the way that you say it. And I know that for some of you, you're like, oh, this is too touchy-feely and I don't want to have to, walk on eggshells around people. But people in crisis need you to do this. They need you to do this. They need to be handled with the ultimate care. And you are going to have to walk on eggshells a little bit. I'm sorry. It's just how it is.
Even outside of that, if you're not sure if it'll be helpful, just shut up.
Oh yeah, don't say
like
it.
That's the solution for a lot of this is like, just don't say anything other than I'm sorry, I'm here, I'm listening. Like 90% of the time, the stuff that people say, it's like, that was not helpful. Just don't say anything.
And I think like the other piece of that is no matter what words come out of your mouth, people can tell if you're genuine and if you care. So, and you can say any of the words we're telling you to say, but if you are just saying it and brushing it off, people know. Like you have to say it with love and care. It's just, anyway. Okay. So the next one is don't say, I know how you feel. Period.
Yep.
It's okay, as we've said, and this is going to feel like a little bit of back and forth, like speaking out of two sides of our mouth, because I did just say it's okay to say when I was in this situation, I felt similar. But saying I know how you feel, period, is assuming that you know exactly what they're going through, exactly how they're feeling, exactly, we've given, I feel like, lots of other options of what you can say is I know exactly how you feel, because you probably don't. And it doesn't convey trust. Like you can say, wow, I've been in a really hard situation that was similar, or just don't say that at all. What you're feeling is perfectly normal, is an okay thing to say. Or I see you and I know how painful that must be. And I'm really sorry. Like, I think it comes from people just assuming that they've got you all figured out and they've got this situation all figured out. And that's not helpful. And I know that makes me cranky when people do that.
Well, every person's grief and experience of loss and crisis is different. Every one of us. And so when I was 13 and my dad was killed from an accident, like, I don't remember the specifics, but I remember like people saying, I know how you feel. He was like a dad to me. Or I know how you feel, you know, my cat got run over a month ago. Like, and it's like, no.
That takes my breath away.
And again, these are teenagers. They don't know what they're saying. Like,
exactly.
But still, I just wanted to punch them in the face.
Yeah.
You know, because I was like, no, you don't. Like, you don't. And so even now, I am very careful. Even if I know someone who has lost a parent when they are young, I'm not going to say to those kids, I know how you feel.
Yeah.
I can say, I've experienced the loss of a parent when I was young, and I know it's very painful, but that's different than saying, I know how you feel.
Very different. Yeah.
Okay.
And on the outset, like we could both say we've experienced the death of a parent.
Yeah.
But both of our experiences are vastly different.
Yep. Yeah. And both equally, well, it's not about equal, but both we experience great devastation and loss and pain and grief. And it's just, you know, it's just different. And so don't say it.
Yeah. Just don't do it.
Cross that one off the list of possible things to say. Okay. This episode is going to be really long.
I know. Okay. You want to do the last one?
Yeah. So don't assume someone should be over it by a certain time.
Yes.
And don't think that just because it's been a year or just because it's been, 6 months or 5 years that they're fully recovered and healed and whatever. Grief is unpredictable. Grief is a long process. And again, depending on the situation, depending on the circumstances, etc., they may on the outside look like they're doing better after 3 months, but there may still be a lot going on the inside. There may be stuff that they've not dealt with and they're going to deal with it 3 years from now. Like there's just, you can't assume that you know when someone is quote unquote healed or better. And so again, definitely don't tell them that they should be over it by now, but also don't go into the conversation thinking, oh, okay, she's all set. We can just move on to other things now.
Well, and I mean, like if we think back, like, okay, your dad passed away when you were 13, right? Like talking about that now, you're probably most of the way okay about that. But there's still going to be painful areas. There's still going to be things this many years later that are hard to talk about. I mean, and that's okay. Like on the outset, we would be like, oh, well, shoot, that was so long ago. She should be fine. Well, no.
Right. I mean, there's still times when I tell the story and I choke up, and it actually sometimes that surprises me because I'm like, I've told it so many times, I've shared, but there's still moments, and when I look at my daughter and I realize like she never knew my dad, like the person that is her grandfather to her is not my dad, and so there are those times. You're right. It is not something. And I think there's that phrase that's like, oh, time heals all wounds. And I'm like, no, not really.
No, it doesn't.
You have scars. The wounds will have scars. And so, yes, your body may have healed, but there is still a mark there, when you have a physical scar. And similarly, you can still have things in your life that, if something happens related to that issue, it could reopen that wound more easily, or it could cause pain. So, yeah. Okay. we gave a lot of information today. All right, let's wrap this up.
Okay.
Let's acknowledge there's somebody listening right now and they're like, oh my word. Yeah. I'm not doing that. That's too hard. I'm just going to let someone else on my team deal with the supporting people. Yeah. But maybe we can acknowledge that as leaders, again, this is an area we can grow in. So what are some just simple tips that you would give, Holly, for someone who's feeling nervous about showing up and supporting someone? How could they get started with this?
Yeah. So we've mentioned this before, but literally just reaching out to someone, a text, a phone call, just tell them that you're thinking about them and praying for them. Really start with something simple and easy. Sending a text doesn't take that long. You may feel unsure about how to word it, but literally just writing, thinking of you, praying for you. That's it. You don't have to write anything else. You don't have to go into anything super deep, like thinking of you during and then rehashing the whole thing, just I see you. I'm sorry you're in so much pain. That may feel trite. It may feel not enough, but it's a really great start.
Yeah.
And it's also a really great start with that person because you don't want to just like love bomb them right off the bat. You kind of need to dip your toe into the water and kind of figure out what sort of support that they need. And so just starting off with something super simple. I know we're not a generation that really writes cards anymore, but even just a card, like honestly, something super duper simple.
Yep.
And just knowing, and we've said this, just knowing that someone else sees your pain is really huge and validates what you're going through is difficult. So think about ways that you can do that in small, simple ways. And then if they are willing to talk to you, if they want to go a little bit deeper, oftentimes out of those conversations, you will walk away with practical ideas. So don't put pressure on yourself to know exactly what to do right away. If they're willing to engage with you, if they're willing to talk with you and go kind of to that next level, oftentimes you're going to come away with things that you can do. And if you don't, that's okay. You've at least taken that next step and said, how can I support you? How can I pray for you? Do you want to talk about this? And then circle back in a week or two. Hey, how are you doing? I've been thinking about you. Like these are all super duper simple things that I think we sort of look at as not enough. And it's okay to start small. If you want to go to that next step and you really truly are unsure, you can ask those people closest to them how you can support them, whether it's their spouse, their parent, their best friend, someone else that's kind of like in the know with them. How can I support them? Are there a bunch of people doing something that I could jump on the bandwagon for? Is there something that I can spearhead? Because oftentimes, if it's someone close to them, they may also be going through something too. But being able to just simply ask, what can I do to that person? So know that they may not be able to articulate. So in that conversation, I would defer to what Esther said, say, can I do this or this? Would this or this be helpful? Sometimes you do need to give suggestions. Sometimes you can literally say, what do you guys need? Again, a lot of this comes down to discernment, wisdom, figuring it out as you kind of go along. But then also, I had people reach out to me when you were going through what you were going through, and they said, what can I do? And I said, I can tell you exactly what you can do. So sometimes the people nearest to them know exactly what they need and want other people to join. Like when I was wanting to support you, I didn't want to be the only person doing it, not because I felt like it was too much or anything like that. I wanted you to feel surrounded by multiple people, not just me. And so oftentimes those people who are in those positions know exactly what you can do. So it really depends on the situation. This is so situational, so dependent on what's happening. And don't feel bad. If you personally are not in a season where you can do a whole lot, literally praying for someone is huge. Sending a note of encouragement is huge. When you're going through even a financial crisis and someone gives you $5, you know what a big deal $5 is. You know what I mean? So just remember that there's nothing too small. I talk about this on my other podcast, my business podcast, when I talk about generosity. There's a lot of times when people don't reach out and do small things because they don't feel like it's enough. They have this big idea in their head, like, I want to give $10,000. I want to give $5,000. And because they can't sit down and write a $5,000 check, they don't do it. But what if you were to give $10 to 500 people? What does that look like? I mean, it's kind of the mentality of, the whole starfish thing, throwing them back in the ocean.
Right.
Well, you can't do it for everybody, but it matters to that one. And I know that's super cliche, but really any sort of small thing that you can do to just let people know that you're there for them can be huge. So start small and work your way up. And I think empathy and discernment are huge when it comes to trying to figure out how you can support people.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't know what else to say.
Well, I think we gave some good, hopefully helpful insights into this topic. And if you have other insights or ideas, share them in the Facebook group. In this, we'll probably have a post about this episode when it comes out. We'd love to hear your thoughts about it as well. So this has been kind of like a heavy episode. So
I know it really has.
We're going to do a fun question here at the end.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, I'm going to let you pick because I put a couple there, and we didn't talk about it ahead of time.
Ooh. Okay. What's one thing on your bucket list? That's the question.
Shoot. I have to answer it.
You didn't think about
it. I sort of thought about it. It's one of those, like, I just found a question on the internet and didn't really.
Okay.
Well, do you know the answer?
Yeah, I know one of my answers. So, and you're going to laugh because I say it every time. Like, I want to go to Italy. Like, that's on my list. Like, I want to go there. I mean, I would love to go to like Fiji too, or like the Maldives and stay in one of those like hut things that are over the water. Like, most of my bucket lists are vacation things. I don't really have like, they're places I want to go, places I want to travel, cultures I want to experience. My bucket lists are not really like, I want to go skydiving or, like that's not, I really want to experience other cultures and see other places and travel the world. Those are my bucket list things.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to have to be pretty similar.
Yeah.
I would really love to go to New Zealand. That's one of the places on my bucket list that I would love to see and probably like be able to hike there. So I agree. I don't have a ton of things that are like crazy adventure things, but I would probably do some of the adventure things if given the opportunity, but I'm not like, I don't want to go skydiving.
No.
The older I get, the less risky I am with my body being flung out into the sky. I would like to go every time I go to Florida. I'm like, I want to do the parasailing.
Oh, yes.
And we almost did that
You're
last
like pulled
time.
behind the boat. Is that parasailing?
I would like to do that's parasailing. You're up in the sky. So Scott and I were almost going to do that, but then you and I decided to go jet skiing. So we did that.
That was a different kind of adventure.
That was an adventure for sure. Woo!
I think
it was fun.
However many weeks later or like month, I finally recovered from that.
We discovered that jet skiing on the ocean is quite the workout for the inner thighs and the arms and the triceps.
Oh, yeah.
And all the things. And then it's hard to walk afterwards a lot. So when you have a combination of a really bad sunburn on the back of your legs and you've gone jet skiing for 2 hours, it's interesting walking up and down stairs. Let's just say that.
Okay. So I have a question about this. Do you have like a written down bucket list anywhere?
No, I don't. I don't actually think I do.
No.
I have like, no, I don't.
There's things I want to do, but I wouldn't say like they're on a specific bucket list.
Like if I found out I was going to die in a year, like I don't have like I would probably make a bucket list then. I'd be like, okay, let's start traveling today.
Month 1, here's where we're going. Month 2.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to say something else. Okay. I just created my bucket list right now.
Oh, okay.
I would love to do an RV trip out west and see like a whole bunch of the national parks or even all the way across the country. But really the West, I would love to see more of the parks out there or go back to some of the ones I've been to. So that would be
We decided that our next vacation is going to be out west because we've done so much on the East Coast because obviously this is where we live. But our next vacation that we like plan and pay for. Well, I say that, but like it's so easy to just be like, let's go on a cruise because then I don't have to think about it. I mean, it's not easy to pay the money, but
no, right. It's less involved in terms of the planning for sure.
Right, exactly. But maybe that's our next family vacation. Like, I mean, all of us.
if you can get my husband on board with going in an RV, because I haven't gotten him to buy into that yet.
Does it have to be in an RV or would you just go out west?
I guess it doesn't have to be.
We actually, the two of us together, have a bucket list item that we haven't said. Do you know what it is?
I think so.
We want to take our families to Guatemala.
Yes. Yes.
We want to go as family. Yeah.
I don't know how we're going to do all these things. We have a lot of things we want to do that involve travel. So if you want to be a sponsor of this podcast,
it's going to go directly into Esther and Holly's travel fund.
Support us in our crisis of not being able to go on all the trips we want to go on.
Yeah, it is a crisis.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, we've sufficiently talked your ear off. So thank you for being here for this episode of the podcast. As always, please make sure you are sharing with a friend so that more people can join these hopefully enlightening conversations in the future. All right, friend.
Hopefully.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, friend. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. We're so glad you took the time out of your day to listen, and I truly hope that it made an impact on your ability to lead well. If it did, would you consider sharing this episode with a friend? You could take a screenshot of the episode and share it on your social media, maybe an Instagram story or on Facebook, or you could just text the link to a friend. We would truly appreciate that, as when you share with a friend, it helps spread the word about the podcast, and it helps more women to be able to be impacted so that they can lead and love others well. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.